All right. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Growth Champions Live, where we dive into the tools, tactics, and frameworks to help you double your home service business. I'm Nick, the co founder of Distance. And for those of you who don't know, Distance is the AI sales automation platform built for service businesses. And I'm here with, once again, my main man, um, world traveler, Mr. Ethan Song. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me again.
Good, good, good. So before we jump in, this is a live show. So if you want to ask questions, you just hit the little hand button and type your question in, and we will accommodate it and answer it as best we can. So for today, I wanted to chat about ads, meta ads in particular. So Facebook and Instagram. Obviously, if you're running a service business, how to get customers is top of mind, and a lot of folks will resort to Google ads or listing ads, or they'll resort to meta ads. And there's a lot to unpack here, especially coming from the e-commerce business where ads are like the lifeblood of a business. There's a lot of learnings that I think have not necessarily translated into the home service businesses. There's a lot of best practices that are not being, executed when I look at a lot of ad sets. So I want to jump into this topic. There's a lot of meat around the bone here, and you in particular, Ethan, built a huge business reliant on ads, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's a good thing, but I've definitely spent throughout some of my brands like millions of dollars on ads, and I've seen also the changes that Meta has implemented over the years in terms of what works, what doesn't work, and obviously like the rise of Instagram and now TikTok, which we're not going to talk about today, but effectively different formats, different channel, and different ways of targeting your potential users. But I tend to agree with you. I think if you think about local businesses or home services, I think a lot of owners start with, hey, I want to improve my, Google reviews. I want to have a better page, maybe on Yelp, maybe on Google. But then those tend to be passive. And at some point, you want to accelerate your business, especially for new businesses where maybe you don't have, an order book or a list of, existing customers and you want to build your business. I think that, Facebook and Instagram ads are a good way of doing that. But that said, I don't think that most companies are doing it properly.
Yeah, so maybe that's like a good place to start, which is before we even talk about if you should be doing it, how should you be doing it? Why do most people that are doing this for the first time fail? Let's just kind of get those pieces out right away.
Well, I think there's many challenges. I think the first thing is most, home service companies are not marketing companies. They don't have marketing background. They don't have, people in their team that have those capabilities. So I think there's a resourcing issue that it starts at. I would say the second point is that I think a lot of them do end up hiring agencies, and I'm not sure that the agencies are the due diligence, making sure the agencies are competent. I think that there's a gap there. You give a couple of $1,000s to an agency and you hope that they get the job done, but unfortunately, it's not as simple and something that you need to be optimized on a daily basis. I would say, like, I think knowledge overall
Yeah.
it is a challenge. And look, the reality is, if you think back like 10, 20, or even 30 years ago, a lot of these businesses were advertising locally, newspapers, flyers and things like that. And now we're just seeing the digital version of that.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And I think for a lot of folks who are thinking about doing this for the first time, I think they need to make sure they understand what they're getting themselves into, how much money they need to spend to truly drive leads into the funnel, right? And what that math looks like. So maybe let's kind of start there. Can you kind of walk us through the math of or like the unit economics of advertising, right? Like what are some of the metrics that you should be familiar with and understand? Whether you're doing it yourself or even going into like an agency conversation, I think you need to understand some kind of key principles here that make you a little bit smarter entering the fray.
Yeah, look, I think ultimately what any owner cares about is the cost of acquisition, or I would say in e-commerce, what we call that the CAC, or even in the software world, you call that a CAC, which is effectively the total cost that you will pay for a customer. So the simplest way of calculating that is to say like, hey, how much did I spend in marketing, and divide that that by the number of jobs or new customers that you booked or acquired. So that's the simplest way of thinking about it. Now, there are also other metrics like cost per impressions and things like that. But honestly, I wouldn't even worry about those. I would go straight down to the cost per acquisition because effectively the only thing you care about is making money, right? Like building awareness is not enough. You know, you don't have excessive budgets. And so I think cost per acquisition is extremely important. Now, after that, what you want to compare that to is what, we would call lifetime value. But in the case of home services, I think rather than thinking about how will this customer spend over the lifetime of them being my customer, which may be hard to judge at this point, you can literally compare your cost to acquire customers towards how much they spend with you. So like say you do, Christmas lights installation or gardening, what's that average price of a job that you can earn? So let's say it's $1,000. Then how much are you willing to spend in marketing to get that $1,000? That's basically the CAC to LTV ratio that you'd be looking for. And obviously, the lower the CAC, the higher the LTV, the better the outcome. But it all depends on how recurring your service is and how expensive a service is. Obviously, that will also impact conversion. So that's the way I would think about it. And so when you speak with your agent or if your agency, I mean, or you do it yourself, I think that I would challenge them to say, hey, what is the recommended budget
Mm.
and like how many customers you think we should be getting for that, and then make the math on your side to see if it makes sense or not.
Yeah, and a lot of the home service businesses that I've talked to over the past, several months, what I've been surprised by is the focus on repeats. So a lot of them take a lot of pride in having customers that just, keep coming back. Obviously, if it's like a plumbing business where, it happens once and hopefully don't come back for a very long time, but in, window washing or landscaping, things like that, a lot of them have very high repeat rates. So their lifetime value is actually quite high. Actually, it could be very, very high, which is very attractive from an ad standpoint, right? Because you could spend a lot of money acquiring a customer who's going to keep coming back and back and back and give you quite a lot of cash flow over the course of their business with you. So especially these kinds of contracts, it's not like they're selling something for like $100, right? They're thousands of dollars to landscape your yard for a season. They're quite valuable contracts.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a fair point in the sense of like what that like cost per acquisition to like contract value ratio will be depends on how aggressive you want to be, right? And
Yeah,
so like if you have a bunch of cash sitting around, you want to invest, you want to dominate your local market, absolutely, be more aggressive, and maybe you don't care about paying back that money in the first month, and you're okay with basically investing for the future. I think that it's a strategy that's worked in a lot of other industries. It's definitely a viable strategy, but on the other hand, if it's your own money, you're just getting started, and you really need to see that money come back, in a positive ROI
yeah,
within a
yeah,
short amount of time. I do think you also want to be conservative. But the reason why we're talking about it is so that you're even aware
yeah,
of the bet that you're making on that piece of advertising. And I think, look, the reality is, I think a lot of people that work in home services are not as like data focused. And I think what I'm trying to like teach them is you don't need to know all the data. Just focus on one or two pieces of data, just like right? How much you're earning and how much you're paying your technicians and contractors for your
mhm,
job, you should know how much you're paying for your advertising.
yeah. So the kind of next logical question is like, all right, and I think you can answer this question two ways, and they could both be right. But what is the right starting point? At what point should you say I am now ready for ads? Right, like now I am now at a point in my business where ads will make sense.
I don't know if there is a point. I would say it really depends on what your personal history is. And what I mean by that is I a lot of people in the space do start, they work for someone else, they eventually, like let's say they're doing window washing for a larger company locally, and then they split off and then start their own. And so like typically when you start off your business, you'll bring a few customers, through referrals and friends and family and things like that, and that's how you'll get started. But if you don't have any customers, I think it's perfectly fine to start on day one as well. So I don't necessarily think that there's one specific time. I think that it's worth doing it at any time, but you got to do it right. And like I think the risk that I do see, and I'm not answering your question at all, but the risk that I see a lot of people is, they want to generate more leads, they want to generate
Yeah,
more business, they put a bunch of money on marketing. 3 months goes by, they spend like 10 grand, they got
yeah,
no results, have no idea what's working, and then they cancel and then stop doing it. And say, so I think it's like, how do you don't end up like on the losing end of that, but
yeah,
actually think of it as a tool that can help you to grow, Now, the other thing that ads are interesting is it's not just about selling your services. I think that it can be strategically used if, say, like, hey, you're doing gardening services right now and you have a book of clients, but now you're offering like other services like, snow removal in the winter time, but people don't know that you're doing that. And
Yeah.
so retargeting your current customers, like advertising to new customers, I think those are all things that can work really well. And the reality is ads are very timely. And so like the other thing that I think why it makes sense for home services is that you'll see an ad and you'll need that service literally that day, right? And so you see the ad, you click on it, and maybe you call the person or you fill out a form. And so I think that like for seasonal businesses, there's also a lot of power from leveraging ads properly.
Yeah, I would also say, the sales channel you pick, it's incredibly important, especially at the beginning, that you kind of understand the underbelly of it. You understand how it works. Like you would never start your business and then not go if you were doing sales and going door to door and knocking on doors, you would never start that process with someone else doing that for you, right? Like
Yeah.
you need to be at the front lines. You need to have some dirt on your face from that experience. So my other kind of call out here is like if this is something you're interested in, I think anyone can do it. Anyone can do it. There's a bunch of different strategies and we'll talk through them. There's probably enough material to talk to do like 3 episodes just about this, but you need to study it. Like, you need to be a student of how this stuff works. Whether you do it yourself in the long term or not, you need to understand it, and you need to understand how successful people are doing it so that you can mimic it, and obviously add your own spin to it. But I think a lot of people think of this as like checking a box, like, "Oh, I'm gonna do like SEO, I'm gonna write some blogs, or I'm gonna do some ads, I'm gonna throw some stuff up on Facebook." Like, that's a very, surefire way to spend a lot of money and lose it, pretty quickly. Anyway, that's just my 2 cents, but, I think a lot of people do not feel confident, to do it themselves, so they wanna hire an agency. So, having hired I mean, we've both hired agencies in the past, we've both done stuff ourselves in this space. If you were hiring an agency today, like, what would you look for? What would be some of the things that you would be kind of, evaluating?
Yeah, look, I mean, the reality, I think that for a lot of, companies, hire an agency will be the right move. Just because even if you, study courses, you watch a bunch of YouTube videos, listen to a bunch of podcasts, it still may not be the thing that you're truly passionate about, which means that you're not going to be as good. Now, I tend to agree with you that whether you hire an agency or not, you should spend that like, couple weeks like studying so you have a general understanding of what you're buying into and like so you can evaluate the right agencies. But I think as you think about potentially hiring an agency, well, it's very simple. It's either you doing it, an agency doing it, or you hire someone, internally to do it. And I think in most cases, hiring someone internally is very challenging. And so
Mhm.
I think an agency can work. Now, a few things about hiring an agency. I think the first thing that people mistake is that you should be spending in terms of like marketing spend at least 3 times more than what you're paying an agency. At least if not 5 times more, because otherwise it means that all your budget is towards paying for,
Yeah.
staff or humans and individuals and not for actually deploying the marketing dollars. And like, if you want to be truly, um, stringent on your ROI, you actually have to include the cost of the agency, right? And your cost of acquisition. And so that's why I think one, the mistake small businesses make is that they hire an agency and pay them 2 grand a month. And then after that, they like barely have any budget to actually spend in marketing.
Yeah.
And then in that point, you should just not do it. So I think that like finding an agency that's fairly affordable, that will do the work for you. Now, I know some agencies are also willing to do as a percentage of like ad spend, you know, whether I think it's a good idea or not. Honestly, no, but I think that if you don't have the budget, it might be a way to get you started. But I would definitely challenge the agency, ask them if they have experience with companies like yours, show them like case studies of company like yours, show them, ask them for the metrics to see if they
Mhm.
understand the metrics themselves. And then ask them like, hey, like how would you market my companies uniquely in the space? And that's something maybe we're gonna talk about. But like I think the biggest challenge in home services is like, well, if there's like 4 companies that are, advertising HVAC services in my geography beyond price, what like how do I even differentiate? Right. And so I think having them come up with ideas and effectively present you a plan, both financially as well as creatively, is a good way of seeing like who you think could be better.
Yeah, exactly. If you do the same thing as everyone else, you're gonna get the same results as everyone else. This is definitely one of those things where you need to figure out a way to stand out. So you talked a little bit about price, like $2,000 a month, for folks listening. Like, is that, is that a good price? Is that a fair price? Is that a medium price? Like what like where would it rank? Obviously, we can talk about how expensive it can get, but I think the bigger question is like what does fair look like in today's economy if you're looking to hire someone? I've seen like 2 grand a month and then they switch to like a percentage of sales after you hit some threshold. Like I think that's a pretty standard one. I don't know if you agree or not.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's, I think you can find people that will start to work at like maybe about 800 to 1,000. Because like, you gotta think about it this way, right? They're thinking this in terms of like hourly rate. And so if they're like charging you 75 bucks an hour, whatever, that's like only like what, like 10 hours, like
Mm,
10 to 12 hours. And so that's why the prices increases so fast. And so I think that like somewhere around that is probably the price at which it starts. But once again, it depends on the geography that you're based in. So obviously, someone in New York City is not going to be paying the same as like someone in Indiana, But like around there is typically where it's going to start. Now, the other thing is you can also find people that are like remote, therefore not there. I also find another good strategy is find someone that like used to work in agency and now is an independent
yeah,
contractor,
that's the best.
and they're happy to have like 3, 4 customers, and it can charge you half basically of that
Yeah,
what a small agency would charge you, and that's where maybe you get in that $1,000 range. But like, regardless, like too cheap is not good either because
yeah.
like if you go online, you can find people for really cheap, but then you got to ask yourself like how much time they're going to spend on this and how good are they really if they're willing to take the lowest fee.
Yeah, you don't wanna, like, hire your niece who, is digitally savvy, like, then that's the qualification, right? So you wanna stay away from things like that.
Like there's no doubt that like the best is that you do it yourself. Like
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
the thing is like I think the agency route is a good route for a lot of people, but if you can do it yourself, like the reality is that it seems very daunting, but for a local business, once you have the ad set up, like there isn't like 1,000 things that you can do, and your
yeah,
budget is not humongous either. And so, I do think that if you spend like a couple $100, take one of those like online courses, there's a lot of great ones. I think you can do it yourself, and then just learn over time. But that said, yeah, I mean the agency route is a route that a lot of people will choose. That's why I definitely want to make sure we can give them some advice on that.
yeah, yeah. Alright, cool. Well, let's say, okay, you've decided to go yourself, or you decided to work with an agency, but you want to have a say in, like, the kinda creatives that are being produced. So obviously, when we're talking about ads, like we're talking about images, we're talking about videos, we're talking about some creative concepts here that are really kind of like what's going to drive the efficacy, right? There's like two levers. There's who you're targeting, like are you targeting the right people, and is it going to them at the right time? And then it's like, okay, what are they actually seeing, right? So let's focus on that second thing, which is what are they actually seeing? Um, and here, there's a lot to dig into. So, like, how have you seen any, like, really good creative ads in this sector, in the home service space? Like, what have you seen here that's, like, stood out to you, and how could some of the folks that are listening kinda take that away to inspire them and not just do, like, a generic, you know, stock image of a plumber, with some kind of, like, generic headline?
Honestly, I think that the best way that I've seen, and I think that's what's working right now, is you yourself as the owner appearing in the ad,
Mm, yeah,
right? And like because once again, no one can be you, right? And so like if you come from like a certain like background, like international background, or if you have a certain look, it doesn't matter. If you're funny, you're funny. So I would actually say that like personality, I think is incredibly defensible, and so it's something to consider. And then like doing videos also, I think of you, I think it works really well. So I think that's one area that I would say like people could lean into. Now, obviously, some people say I'm not comfortable with that. If you're not comfortable with it, well, get your son to do it. Like get someone on
yeah,
your team to do it. Find someone that can speak about your business. And I think that the beauty about it is it creates a human connection right away. Like I said, like when you have an ad and it's just like a picture, and it's a stock picture and the tagline is like a stock tagline, you're like, okay, like what is this business? Is it even a real business? Whereas like if you show up and you're like, hey, my name is Mario, I immigrated here from Italy, this is my family story, we're building this business, and like every customer matters to us. Right away, you're building that differentiation, you're building that like connection. So I think that's one thing that would be great to do. The second thing is testimonials, whether
yeah,
it's pictures or written, works really really well. And the last idea that I had actually is now there are tons of tools, whether it's like AI generation tools or like even if you're using Canva, like for like design, that are giving teams more things that they can do. And so I would try like I think graphics is something that's also underutilized in the space, animation and graphics using some of those AI tools. And once again, you may not have those skills, but like maybe your kids have them. Maybe someone in your team that is going to school has them, and like challenge them to create something unique. Make it fun. That's where I think there's a lot of benefits. But like whatever you do, try to express your identity.
Yeah.
Because once again, I go always go back to this simple marketing strategy. No one can be you. No one can be
Mm,
better than you at being you,
yeah.
right? Even if you're the worst person in the world,
Yeah, yeah, you're the best at
you
it.
are still you. You're the best
Yeah,
at being
yeah,
the worst
yeah,
person in the world.
yeah. That's a good one. Yeah, so what I'm hearing basically is, like, 1, tell your story, so that's, like, one kinda path. 2 is have other people tell their experience of your service, so testimonials. Um 3, which I'll add to it is, and I've seen these work really well, and it obviously depends on the kind of business that you're in, but the before and after formula, like, you've seen those, like, carpet
Yeah,
cleaning Instagrams where it's, like, the guy literally
that's a
just
great idea. Yeah.
so good. It's so satisfying, and, I mean, you could do a pretty basic one that just shows, like, before and afters, and then if you wanna get really fancy, you get into, like, that ASMR stuff where, you get really good with, like, the audio and the visual, and
Well, I
it's
mean,
like
the reality is that the before and after, you can also do it even if it's not at a client's place,
yeah,
right? Just as like a project to show that your skill level or the caliber of your services. I think like I agree with you with things like gardening makes sense, right? Like tree cutting makes sense. Like make it extra special,
yeah.
make that content exciting.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And we talked about this in the last one. When you think about brand as well, like if you've already done the work of creating a unique brand, like this is the opportunity to like showcase it. So whether it's like men in skirts cleaning, like that thing that we showed last time, or Pink's window washing, like if you've done that work at the beginning to set that structure up, it makes the content that you're producing so much easier, right? Because you're like leaning into that differentiation, which I think is important. But if you haven't done that, a lot of the things that we're saying here still work really, really well. Um, okay, cool. So the next piece, so you have like the image. Well, we should also preface like video performs a lot better than just like a static image. So if you have the choice between like, okay, am I going to produce a bunch of images or am I going to produce a bunch of video to get really tactical? Like start playing with video. Like that's a good place to start
Yeah, and
because
also like formats. I think people
yeah,
tend to forget that, within Facebook itself, there's tons of formats. Within Instagram, you have stories, you have like the standard square. So I think like you definitely have to create different formats. And like I do think that a lot of companies are struggling with that. And that's where
yeah,
once again, using the right tools that will speed up creating all these different formats will also help you. But absolutely, I think video is where it's at right now. All the social media platforms are promoting videos. And so if you create a video, your ad will get more coverage, will get more engagement. And so it's definitely recommended to do that. But once again, video doesn't have to be complicated. I think people are intimidated. They're like, what am I going to put in a video?
mm,
What, once again, before and after it can be a video, right? So you
yeah. I
just turn
mean,
that same thing that it was static, like instead of being a quote from a customer, get someone to say something. And,
yeah.
and so that's where it comes in.
Yeah, and production value means nothing here, right? You could be in your truck, like, recording on your iPhone, not while you're driving, like, when you're parked, and that works actually better, right? Like, the less production value, at least today, that seems to be resonating with folks a lot more in terms of conversion rate.
Yeah. I think like storytelling always ranks ahead of like production value. And
Yeah,
so I think having a unique point of view, I think is what I would focus on, something fun, something unique to you to say. And then, yeah, eventually, if you want to improve your production value, you can do that as well. I do think one small caveat is if you're in a space where trust is really important, having something a little bit cleaner will probably build more trust than in other areas where maybe it's not as critical.
yeah. I will say there is some, like, tactical stuff if you're doing this as well that's important to note. There is a minimum spend, like, you wanna be spending at least, like, 20, $30 per ad per day in order to generate, some results. So, you're not gonna get much out of, like, a $100 a week budget. Like, you do need to start with some baseline spend
Yeah.
to have some impact. And, there's a lot of stuff that like Facebook has done over the past, few years to make your life a lot easier. So, you can have it generate headlines. Like you put in one and it'll generate like 5 or 6 for you, right? And it will automatically go out and test all those iterations. It could also create creative for you. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that at the beginning. I think the copy, like having it iterate on different copy, headlines and texts and descriptions, I think is good. You can also use ChatGPT. It's a great way to use that kind of like free tool and just have it feed you a bunch of different iterations and plug those in, and let Facebook kind of like optimize your ad for you. But you need a minimum number of ads. You need a minimum budget in order to get some like outcome that is going to move the needle.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I would say is I think like even though you're so one a challenge with like audiences, right, as it relates to Facebook is that because you're typically serving a local market, it's different than like a brand that basically can advertise globally or at least nationally, in the US. And so I think that is a limitation, but that said, I still think it's worth like spending time on like figuring out who your perfect customer is,
Yeah.
because like the buyer of that product or service that you have to offer may be different. Like it may age, demographic, like gender, all those things could play into that. And it is worth testing. Now, it may have no impact after you do some testing, but typically someone is the buyer of those services. And so if you can figure that out for your business, once again, you'll just get better click through and ultimately better conversion rates.
Yeah, exactly. And like you can go build an audience on Facebook and basically tell them, "Hey, I think my customer is A, B, C, D, and E," and go out and try to like craft at the top of the funnel, some version of your ICP of your ideal client profile and send that out. Or you can upload a list and be like, "Hey, these are my customers." So if you've done a good job collecting emails and information, you could literally upload a client list and have them target those individual people. Or you could there's like a third way, which is you take that list and you say, "Okay, hey, here are my clients. Can you go and build um, what they call a lookalike audience of folks similar to this, right?" And you can actually go out and if you've made like 10 pieces of creative, you can test those 10 different creatives across those different audiences, and then see which one resonates, right? And then double down. So there's a lot of testing and learning. And we should probably include in the show notes here and in the email recap some good references and courses that folks can take to
Yeah, and some of the tools that we
yeah,
mentioned so that
yeah,
people
yeah,
can
yeah.
easily have this toolbox they can use.
Yeah, but, like, we haven't even scratched the surface. We've been talking here for 30 minutes, and we haven't even scratched the surface of this stuff. So it's like if this is a strategy that you think will work for your business, you just need to put the hours in and really kinda go 2, 3 layers deeper. Hopefully, some of these points that we're talking about here kind of unlock some nuggets that you can then, double click on. But there's a lot here to digest. So anything else you wanna add? I know we're coming up on time.
No, I mean, I think that the second part of this is really related to like conversion rates. Obviously, cost of
Yeah,
acquisition means someone would have contacted you, called you, signed up to something, and you would have closed them. So, but from my understanding, that's next week, and
yeah.
so we'll be happy to cover that.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right. Well, thank you everyone for joining. A quick little note that this episode is brought to you by Distance. So, Distance is the AI sales automation platform built for service businesses. With Distance, you can convert more leads and save money on operating costs with an AI agent who works 24/7, answering messages from inbound requests to lead qualification. If you're interested in learning more, visit us at www.distance.so and book a demo. Until next week then.
All right, thanks
See you in a bit.
again. We'll see you
All right.
soon. Yeah.
Ciao guys.